Before pyramids pierced the sky and mummies made bedtime awkward, there was only sand, stars, and stories. The Nile didn't just flow, it whispered. It gurgled secrets to the reeds, hummed lullabies to the crocodiles, and carried the dreams of a civilization that believed everything, from the rising sun to the sneeze of a god, had meaning. Egypt wasn't built in a day. It was sculpted slowly, like a sleepy cat stretching in the sun. The land was dry, the people curious, and the gods, well, they were dramatic. But before gods had temples and pharaohs had crowns, the people of the Nile looked around and asked the big questions. Where did we come from? Why does the sun rise? Is that beetle rolling the sun? They didn't have science yet, but they had imagination, and that was more powerful than any telescope. They saw the Nile flood and recede, crops grow and vanish, the sun rise and fall. Life was a cycle, and so were their stories. Every event had a divine cause, every mystery a myth. So they dreamed up gods, gods of air and moisture, of sky and earth, of life and death and rebirth, gods who loved, fought, cried, and occasionally turned into animals. These weren't distant deities. They were family, messy, magical, and deeply involved in human affairs. The Nile became more than a river. It was the spine of their world, the stage for their myths, and the reason they believed in balance. Ma'at, truth, order, harmony. Without it, chaos, aka Set, would reign, and nobody wanted that. Not even Set, sometimes. And so, the myths began, whispered by priests, carved into stone, painted on tombs, stories of creation, betrayal, resurrection, and eternal judgment. Stories that made sense of the stars and soothed the fear of death. But don't worry, we'll get to the gods soon. First, let's meet the one who started it all. A lonely god, floating in watery silence, about to sneeze the universe into existence. If you're still awake, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Whether it's under a blanket in London, or curled up on a couch in Cairo. In the beginning, there was nothing. And then, there was a god with no one to talk to. Before time had a tick, and before the Nile had a trickle, there was only none. The endless, dark, watery nothingness. No sky, no land, no Wi-Fi, just a cosmic soup of silence, floating in forever. And then, from the stillness, something stirred. A ripple, a thought, a divine yawn, and out of that watery hush rose a mound, the first land, called the Ben-Ben. It was warm, solid, and slightly confused to exist. Upon this mound appeared Atum, the first god, self-created, self-aware, and possibly self-conscious. He had no parents, no siblings, and no idea what to do next. But he had one thing, potential, and a lot of it. Atum looked around at the nothingness and thought, well, this is awkward. So, like any lonely creator, with too much time and not enough company, he decided to make more gods. But how? Some say he sneezed. Others say he spat. A few say he used more creative methods. But however it happened, from Atum came two new beings, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. The world had its first breath and its first drop of dew. Atum was thrilled. He had children. He had company. He had someone to blame when things went wrong. But then Shu and Tefnut wandered off into the watery void, as kids do. Atum, panicked, sent his eye, yes, his literal eye, to search for them. When they returned, safe and slightly soggy, Atum wept tears of joy. And from those tears, humans were born. So, if you've ever felt like you were born from a divine cry of relief, you're not wrong. With air and moisture in place, the world began to take shape, but it was still missing something. Structure, a place to stand, a sky to look at, a reason to build pyramids. That's when Shu and Tefnut had children of their own. But we'll get to that in the next chapter. For now, just remember, the universe began not with thunder or fire, but with a lonely god, a sneeze, and a heartfelt tear. Every great story needs breath and water, even the ones told by gods with dramatic flair. After Atum sneezed, or spat, or something less polite, the universe got its first pair of twins, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. They weren't just siblings. They were the atmosphere's power couple. Together, they made the world breathable and slightly damp, like a divine weather forecast. Shu was light, breezy, and always floating around with his head in the clouds. Literally, he was the god of air, wind, and the occasional dramatic gust that knocked over papyrus scrolls. Tefnut, on the other hand, was cool, calm, and collected, the goddess of dew, rain, and that mysterious humidity that made linen stick to your back. They were inseparable. Shu would lift, Tefnut would soften, he'd blow, she'd mist. They danced through the void, shaping the early world with every swirl and sprinkle. But like all siblings, they had their moments. Sometimes Shu got too gusty, sometimes Tefnut got too soggy, but they balanced each other, like a cosmic weather system with feelings. Atum, proud of his children, watched them shape the world. But then, like toddlers in a supermarket, they wandered off into the watery chaos of none. No GPS, no divine tracking app, just gone. Atum panicked. He sent his eye, yes, his literal, magical, all-seeing eye, to find them. The eye searched high and low, through mist and breeze, until it found Shu and Tefnut, slightly damp and slightly embarrassed. When Atum saw them return, he cried tears of joy, and from those tears, humans were born. So, if you've ever felt like you were born from a divine sigh of relief, you're not alone. With air and moisture now swirling through the cosmos, the stage was set for the next act. The birth of Geb, the god of earth, and Nut, the goddess of sky. But that's a story for the next chapter. And trust me, it's a love story with altitude. Some love stories are written in the stars. This one was written across the entire sky and the ground. Now that Shu and Tefnut had filled the world with breathable air and gentle moisture, it was time for the next divine duo to enter the scene. Geb, the god of earth, and Nut, the goddess of sky. Geb was solid, grounded, and a little ticklish. He stretched across the land, forming mountains, valleys, and the occasional awkward hill. Nut, on the other hand, was graceful, mysterious, and always above it all. Literally, she arched over the world like a celestial blanket, her body dotted with stars, her limbs stretching from horizon to horizon, and they were madly in love. But there was a problem. Their father, Shu, the god of air, wasn't thrilled about their constant cuddling. He believed the world needed space, structure, and less PDA. So, with a mighty gust, Shu pushed Nut up into the sky and pinned Geb down to the earth. The lovers were separated, and the atmosphere was born. Nut wept starry tears. Geb groaned with earthquakes, but despite their separation, they remained connected. Nut's body arched protectively over Geb, and every morning she gave birth to the sun, which traveled across her belly before disappearing into the underworld at night. Their love was eternal, even if their embrace was forbidden, and from their longing came life. Nut gave birth to 5 children, each one destined to shape the fate of gods and mortals alike: Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. But that's a tale for the next chapter, and trust me, it's where the divine drama really begins. For now, picture the sky above you as Nut watching over the earth below, Geb waiting patiently for the day they'll be reunited. Their love is written in every sunrise, every mountain, and every star. When the sky goddess Nut gave birth, she didn't just deliver babies, she delivered legends. Nut, the sky goddess, wasn't just a celestial ceiling. She was a mother, and a very busy one. Despite being stretched across the heavens by her father Shu, she managed to give birth to 5 divine children, each destined to stir up cosmic drama and bedtime stories for millennia. First came Osiris, the golden child, wise, noble, and slightly obsessed with farming. He would grow up to be the god of fertility, agriculture, and eventually the afterlife. He had the calm charisma of someone who could organize a kingdom and still have time to water the papyrus. Next was Isis, Osiris's sister and future wife. She was clever, magical, and fiercely loyal, the kind of goddess who could cast a spell, solve a mystery, and raise a child in hiding, all before breakfast. She would become the goddess of healing, motherhood, and divine multitasking. Then came Set, the wild card, red-haired, fiery-tempered, and born with a flair for chaos. He was the god of deserts, storms, and sibling rivalry. From the moment he arrived, he was ready to challenge the status quo, and maybe knock over a few pyramids. Fourth was Nephthys, the quiet one, mysterious, shadowy, and often overlooked. She was the goddess of dusk, mourning, and protective magic. She would later play a key role in the underworld, and in helping Isis stitch Osiris back together, literally. And finally, Horus the Elder, a falcon-headed god who would later be overshadowed by his younger namesake. But for now, he soared through the skies, watching over the world with sharp eyes and silent wisdom. These 5 siblings weren't just gods. They were the foundation of Egyptian mythology. Their relationships were tangled, their destinies intertwined, and their stories filled with love, betrayal, resurrection, and the occasional magical boat ride. But before the drama unfolds, Osiris must rise to power. He'll become Egypt's first divine king, bringing order to the land and hope to the people. And Set? Well, he's already sharpening his stormy claws. Before crowns were golden and thrones were carved, there was Osiris, the king who ruled with kindness. When Osiris came of age, the gods looked around and said, "This one's got leadership energy." He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't summon lightning or ride flaming chariots. He simply understood people and plants, especially plants. Osiris became Egypt's first divine king, and his reign was the stuff of bedtime legends. He taught humans how to farm, how to plant seeds, harvest grain, and not yell at the Nile when it flooded. He introduced laws, built temples, and made sure everyone had enough bread and a reason to smile. His kingdom was peaceful, orderly, and slightly obsessed with irrigation. People loved him. Animals respected him. Even the wind seemed to blow more politely when Osiris walked by. Beside him stood Isis, his queen, advisor, and magical powerhouse. She wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant. She knew spells, secrets, and how to calm a storm with a whisper. Together, they ruled like a dream, the kind you fall asleep to with a smile. But not everyone was thrilled. Set, Osiris's brother, watched from the shadows. He saw the love, the praise, the perfectly aligned wheat fields, and he seethed. Set didn't understand peace. He preferred chaos, deserts, and dramatic entrances, and he couldn't stand being second. So while Osiris ruled with grace, Set plotted with envy. He whispered to himself, paced in sandstorms, and began crafting a plan that would change everything. But for now, Egypt basked in Osiris's golden age. The Nile flowed gently, the people sang, and the gods watched, knowing that the calm wouldn't last forever. Every peaceful kingdom has a shadow, and Set was the sandstorm, waiting to blow it all away. While Osiris ruled with grace, and Isis enchanted the land with her magic, Set stood in the background, watching, not admiring, not applauding, just simmering. Set was the god of chaos, deserts, and dramatic exits. He didn't like order. He didn't like harmony, and he definitely didn't like how everyone adored his brother. Osiris had the crown, the people's love, and a kingdom that bloomed like a lotus. Set had sand and envy. He paced the dunes, muttering to himself, "Why him? Why not me?" He kicked dust storms into the sky and whispered to the wind. His thoughts grew darker, his plans more twisted. He didn't just want the throne. He wanted Osiris gone. So he hatched a plan, not a loud, flashy one, a clever, quiet one. The kind that starts with a party and ends with a coffin. Set crafted a beautiful chest, carved from rare wood, inlaid with gold, shaped perfectly to fit one person. But not just any person. It was designed to fit Osiris exactly, like a divine trap disguised as a gift. Then he threw a feast, a grand celebration, music, wine, laughter. All the gods were invited, even Osiris, who arrived with his usual calm and charm, unaware that his brother's smile was sharper than a scorpion's sting. Set unveiled the chest and declared, "Whoever fits perfectly inside shall have it as a gift." Gods laughed. They tried. Too big, too small, too awkward. Then Osiris stepped in. He lay down. The fit was perfect. Set slammed the lid shut. The room gasped. Set sealed the chest with magic and hurled it into the Nile. Osiris was gone. Just like that, the party ended in silence. Isis's heart shattered. The kingdom mourned. And Set? He claimed the throne, wearing a crown that didn't quite fit, because it was never meant for him. But this wasn't the end. Not for Osiris, not for Isis, and definitely not for the story. Every legend has a turning point, and this one came sealed in a golden box. The Nile was quiet, too quiet. After Set's party ended with a sealed chest and a missing king, the world felt off. The crops drooped. The wind held its breath. Even the cats seemed concerned. Osiris, the beloved ruler, was gone, tricked, trapped, and tossed into the river like a forgotten gift. The chest drifted down the Nile, carried by currents and silence. It passed villages, temples, and startled fish, until it reached the shores of Byblos, a distant land where it lodged itself beneath a tamarisk tree. The tree grew around it, embracing the box like a secret. Locals admired the tree's beauty, unaware it held a god inside. Back in Egypt, Isis was devastated. Her husband, her king, her partner in divine governance vanished. But Isis wasn't the type to sit and sob. She was the goddess of magic, after all. So she disguised herself, traveled in secret, and searched every corner of the world for Osiris. She finally found the chest in Byblos, hidden in the tree that had become part of a palace. With grace and a few well-placed spells, she retrieved it and brought it back to Egypt. Osiris was home, but Set wasn't done. When he discovered Isis had rescued Osiris, his rage boiled hotter than the desert sun. He stormed into the chamber, tore open the chest, and in a fit of divine fury, chopped Osiris into 14 pieces. Then he scattered them across Egypt like a very dark treasure hunt. Isis, heartbroken but determined, began the search again. With the help of Nephthys, her sister, and Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, she found each piece, one by one, every limb, every fragment, every sacred part, except one. Let's just say it was symbolic. Using her magic, Isis reassembled Osiris. She wrapped him in linen, whispered ancient spells, and performed the first mummification. Osiris stirred. He couldn't return to the land of the living, but he could rule the dead. And so, Osiris descended into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where he became the eternal judge of souls. His death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something deeper, darker, and strangely comforting. Because in Egypt, death wasn't a goodbye. It was a transformation. When love meets loss, magic awakens, and Isis was about to rewrite the rules of death. The Nile mourned. The reeds whispered. The stars blinked in disbelief. Osiris, the gentle king, had been betrayed, sealed in a chest, and scattered across Egypt like a divine jigsaw puzzle. But his story wasn't over, because Isis wasn't done. Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, wasn't just grieving. She was determined. Her love for Osiris was deeper than the Nile, stronger than Set's fury, and more persistent than sand in sandals. She disguised herself as a peasant, a priestess, even a bird. Anything to move unnoticed through the land. Piece by piece, she searched, through deserts and temples, tombs and towns. She found Osiris's foot beneath a lotus, his hand tucked in a cave, his heart hidden in a jar guarded by a very confused crocodile. Each discovery was a victory, each fragment a whisper of hope. By her side was Nephthys, her sister and Set's wife, proof that loyalty sometimes blooms in the strangest places, and Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, who knew more about wrapping linen than anyone alive or dead. Together, they reassembled Osiris, carefully, lovingly, magically. Isis used her spells, her tears, and her will to restore him. She wrapped him in sacred cloth, whispered ancient words, and breathed life into the silence. Osiris stirred. He couldn't return to the land of the living. That door was closed. But he could rise in the Duat, the underworld, and become its king, the first mummy, the first ruler of the dead, the judge of souls. And in that brief moment of reunion, Isis conceived a child, Horus, the falcon-headed god who would one day challenge Set and restore balance. Isis's search wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a declaration that love defies death, that magic heals, and that even in the darkest corners of myth, hope can be reborn. Born of magic and mourning, Horus was the hope Egypt didn't know it was waiting for. The world was quiet, holding its breath. Osiris had been betrayed, murdered, and mummified. Isis had searched, stitched, and summoned, and in the hush of divine grief, something miraculous happened. Horus was born, not in a palace, not in a temple, but in hiding. Isis, fearing Set's wrath, fled to the marshes of the Nile, a place where reeds whispered and crocodiles minded their own business. There, surrounded by magic and moonlight, she gave birth to a child unlike any other. Horus, the falcon-headed god, opened his eyes to a world in mourning. He didn't cry. He didn't fuss. He simply looked up, sharp, focused, ready. His destiny was already written in the stars, and it involved a throne, a battle, and a very complicated family reunion. Isis raised him in secret, teaching him spells, stories, and survival. She whispered tales of Osiris's kindness, Set's betrayal, and the balance Egypt had lost. Horus listened, learned, and grew, not just in strength, but in purpose. He practiced with falcons, trained with shadows, and studied the art of justice. He wasn't just a child, he was a symbol of rebirth, of resistance, of the idea that even in the darkest corners of myth, light can be born. And he wasn't alone. The gods watched, the people hoped. Even the Nile seemed to ripple with anticipation, because Horus wasn't just Osiris's son. He was Egypt's future, and soon he would rise. Wings wide, eyes sharp, ready to challenge Set and restore the balance his father had built. But first, he had to grow, and dream, and prepare. Because the battle was coming. When gods clash, the sky trembles, and Egypt holds its breath. Horus had grown strong, raised in secret by Isis, trained in magic and justice. He was no longer the quiet child of the marshes. He was a falcon-headed force of destiny, ready to challenge Set, the usurper who had stolen his father's throne. The gods gathered, the people whispered, even the Nile seemed to pause mid-current. The battle wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring Ma'at, the sacred balance of truth and order. And so, the war began. Not a single fight, but a series of contests, each more dramatic than the last. Horus and Set clashed in the sky, their forms shifting between animals and storms. One day, they raced boats made of stone. Set cheated. Horus won anyway. Another day, they transformed into hippos and wrestled in the river. Set bit. Horus dodged. The gods acted as judges, referees, and occasionally very confused spectators. Thoth, the god of wisdom, took notes. Ra, the sun god, sighed dramatically. Even Osiris, watching from the underworld, probably muttered, "Kids these days." The battles stretched on for years. Sometimes Horus won. Sometimes Set tricked his way to victory. But Horus never gave up. He fought not just with strength, but with purpose, to honor his father, protect his people, and restore the rightful order. Eventually, the gods called a divine court. Horus and Set stood before them, feathers ruffled, egos bruised. The trial was long, filled with testimonies, magical evidence, and one very awkward moment involving lettuce. Don't ask. In the end, the gods chose Horus. He was crowned king of Egypt, the living embodiment of justice and renewal. Set, depending on the version, was either exiled, forgiven, or given a job guarding Ra's solar boat from chaos serpents. Because even chaos needs a purpose, and so balance was restored. Horus took the throne. Isis smiled. Osiris ruled the underworld. And Set, well, he learned to channel his storms elsewhere. The battle wasn't just a fight. It was a cosmic dance of light and shadow, proving that truth, even when bruised, always rises. In the land beyond the sunset, your heart had to be lighter than a feather. Literally, death, in ancient Egypt, wasn't the end. It was an appointment, with paperwork, a panel of gods, and one very serious feather. When a person died, their soul didn't just drift off into the stars. No, it had to journey through the duat, the underworld, a realm of winding rivers, fire-breathing serpents, and the occasional talking baboon. It was like a cosmic obstacle course, but with higher stakes. At the heart of the duat stood Osiris, now the king of the dead, regal, wrapped in linen, and glowing with quiet authority. He sat on a throne surrounded by gods, judges, and one very hungry monster. The soul would arrive at the hall of Ma'at, named after the goddess of truth and balance. There, it faced the ultimate test, the weighing of the heart. Here's how it worked. The soul's heart, believed to carry all memories, deeds, and secrets, was placed on one side of a golden scale. On the other side, a single feather, plucked from Ma'at's headdress, the feather of truth. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul passed. It was pure, honest, and ready for eternal paradise. But if the heart was heavier, weighed down by lies, cruelty, or bad pyramid jokes, it was tossed to Ammit, the devourer. Ammit wasn't your average monster. She had the head of a crocodile, the front legs of a lion, and the back of a hippopotamus. Basically, the worst parts of every animal that could eat you. One chomp, and the soul was gone. Forever. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, guided the soul through the ceremony. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, recorded the results with divine precision. No bribes, no appeals, just truth. But for those who passed, oh, the rewards were sweet. They entered the field of reeds, a paradise where the Nile flowed forever. Crops grew without effort, and loved ones reunited under golden skies. It was Egypt's version of heaven, and it smelled faintly of lotus and fresh bread. Osiris watched over it all, calm, fair, and eternal. He had once ruled the living. Now, he ruled the dead, and in doing so, he gave the Egyptians something priceless, the belief that death wasn't the end, but a doorway. With the head of a jackal and the heart of a healer, Anubis walked between worlds, silently, faithfully. In the land of the living, people feared death. In the land of the dead, they feared getting lost. That's where Anubis came in, the jackal-headed god who never let a soul wander alone. Anubis wasn't flashy. He didn't throw lightning or ride solar boats. He moved quietly, like a shadow, with purpose. His job was sacred, to guide the dead, protect their bodies, and ensure their journey to the afterlife was smooth, respectful, and linen-wrapped. When Osiris was betrayed and torn apart, it was Anubis who helped Isis and Nephthys gather the pieces. He embalmed the body, wrapped it in sacred cloth, and performed the first mummification. His hands were steady. His heart was calm. His presence was comforting, even in grief. From that moment on, Anubis became the guardian of tombs, the protector of the dead, and the silent guide through the duat. He stood at the gates of the underworld, greeting souls with a gaze that saw everything, their deeds, their fears, their hopes. He led them to the hall of Ma'at, where their hearts would be weighed against the feather of truth. He didn't judge. That was Osiris's role. But he made sure the ceremony was fair. The scales were balanced, and the soul was ready Anubis was also the god of embalming. Priests who prepared the dead wore jackal masks in his honor, believing that his spirit guided their hands. Every wrapped limb, every sacred oil, every whispered prayer, all done under Anubis's watchful eye. Despite his role in death, Anubis wasn't feared. He was respected, loved even, because he didn't bring death, he brought dignity to it. And in a world where the afterlife was just as important as life itself, Anubis was the quiet hero who made sure no soul was forgotten. Every sunrise was a promise, every sunset a battle, and Ra sailed through both. Every single day, before alarm clocks and morning coffee, the ancient Egyptians had Ra, the mighty sun god who lit up the world with his golden glow and kept chaos at bay with his daily commute across the sky. Ra wasn't just a ball of fire in the sky. He was a god with a schedule. Every morning, he climbed aboard his solar boat, the Manjet, and sailed from the eastern horizon, bringing light, warmth, and a reason to wake up. Birds chirped, crops stretched, cats blinked in approval. But Ra's journey wasn't just a scenic cruise. It was a cosmic mission. As he sailed across the sky, he watched over the world, keeping order and balance. By day, he was majestic, a glowing beacon of life. But when evening came, things got complicated. At sunset, Ra boarded his night boat, the Mesektet, and descended into the Duat, the underworld. There, he faced his greatest enemy, Apophis, the Chaos Serpent. Huge, coiled, and very bad at small talk, Apophis tried to swallow Ra's boat every night, to plunge the world into darkness forever. But Ra was prepared. He had a crew of gods, spells, and a very sharp spear. Every night they battled Apophis. Every night they won. And every morning, Ra emerged victorious, rising once again in the east, tired, glowing, and slightly annoyed that chaos never took a day off. Ra's journey wasn't just a myth. It was a metaphor for resilience, for renewal, for the idea that even in darkness, light fights back. The Egyptians worshipped Ra with temples, hymns, and sun-shaped amulets. They believed his journey kept the world alive, and that his battles reminded them to face their own, with courage, routine, and maybe a little magic. So next time you see the sunrise, imagine Ra standing tall on his boat, sailing into the sky with purpose. And when the sun sets, know that he's not resting. He's fighting for tomorrow. When your soul packed for the afterlife, it didn't bring luggage. It brought spells. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't a mystery. It was a journey. And like any good journey, it needed a guidebook. Enter the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells, prayers, and magical instructions designed to help souls navigate the underworld and reach paradise. But don't let the name fool you. It wasn't a single book, bound in leather and sold at divine bookstores. It was a personalized scroll, often tucked into tombs, written in hieroglyphs, and tailored to each soul's needs. Think of it as a cosmic cheat sheet with illustrations. The Book of the Dead didn't just say, "Go left at the fire lake." It offered protection from demons, guidance through gates, and advice on how to talk to crocodile-headed judges without offending them. It included spells to open doors, silence serpents, and even transform into animals, just in case you needed to sneak past a particularly grumpy guardian. One of the most famous spells? Spell 125, the one used during the weighing of the heart. It included a list of negative confessions, where the soul declared all the things it hadn't done, I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not eaten someone else's lunch from the temple fridge. That sort of thing. The goal? To prove the soul was pure, honest, and worthy of entering the field of reeds, a paradise where the Nile flowed forever, crops grew effortlessly, and everyone had a cozy hut with a view. Families spent fortunes on these scrolls. Artists painted them with care. Priests recited them with reverence, because in Egypt, preparing for the afterlife was just as important as living, maybe more. And so, the Book of the Dead became a bridge between life and eternity, between fear and hope, between the known and the mysterious. It whispered, "You are not alone. You are guided. You are remembered." In the quiet halls of eternity, truth wasn't spoken. It was weighed. The journey through the Duat was long. The soul had faced rivers of fire, gates guarded by lion-headed spirits, and riddles whispered by shadows. But now, it stood in the hall of Ma'at, the final test before paradise. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a cosmic Kapit chamber of truth. At the center stood a golden scale. On one side, the soul's heart, pulsing with memories, choices, and secrets. On the other, a single feather, light, pure, plucked from the headdress of a Ma'at, goddess of truth and balance. The soul didn't speak. It confessed, not what it had done, but what it hadn't. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not harmed the innocent. These were the negative confessions, recited with trembling hope. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide, placed the heart on the scale. His hands were steady, his gaze unreadable. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, stood nearby with a scroll, ready to record the outcome. No edits, no appeals, just truth. And watching over it all was Osiris, regal and wrapped in linen, seated on his throne. Around him sat 42 divine judges, each representing a principle of Ma'at. They didn't glare, they didn't smile, they simply waited. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul was pure. It was granted passage to the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal peace, golden crops, and reunions under starlit skies. But if the heart was heavier, burdened by lies, cruelty, or regret, it was tossed to Amit, the devourer, a creature part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. One bite, and the soul was erased, not punished, not tortured, just gone. The Egyptians didn't fear death. They feared failing this test. So they lived with Ma'at in mind. Truth, balance, harmony. Because in the end, it wasn't gold or power that mattered. It was the weight of your heart. In the heart of every city stood a temple, not just a building, but a bridge to the divine. The gods of Egypt didn't just live in myths. They had addresses, grand, sacred, awe-inspiring addresses. These were the temples, towering structures carved from stone, humming with incense, and echoing with chants that reached the heavens. Each temple was dedicated to a specific god. Ra had his sun-drenched sanctuaries. Isis had her magical halls. Horus had falcon-shaped columns. Even Set, despite his reputation, had a few desert shrines, though attendance was sparse. But temples weren't places for public worship like modern churches or mosques. Ordinary people didn't stroll in for a chat with Osiris. These were divine homes, and only the priests had the keys. Priests weren't just spiritual guides. They were caretakers, scholars, and performers of sacred routines. Every day they bathed the statues of the gods, dressed them in fine linen, offered food, which the gods consumed spiritually, and the priests consumed physically. and recited hymns older than the pyramids. There were high priests who managed the temple, like CEOs of the divine, lector priests who read sacred texts and performed rituals, and sem priests who handled purification and wore leopard skins, not for fashion, but for symbolism. Temples were more than spiritual centers. They were economic hubs, storing grain, managing land, and employing thousands. They had scribes, gardeners, cooks, and guards. Some even had schools, libraries, and healing chambers. And the architecture? Breathtaking. Massive pylons, lotus-shaped columns, hidden chambers, and ceilings painted like the night sky. Walking through a temple felt like stepping into a myth, where every wall whispered stories, and every corridor led to eternity. The priests believed that if the gods were honored properly, Ma'at, the balance of the universe, would be maintained. If neglected, chaos could slip in. So they worked tirelessly, day and night, to keep the divine rhythm alive. Because in Egypt, the gods didn't just live in the sky, they lived in stone. In ancient Egypt, magic wasn't a mystery. It was woven into every breath, every step, every sunrise. Life in ancient Egypt wasn't just about pyramids and pharaohs. It was about farmers, bakers, scribes, and weavers. Ordinary people living under extraordinary skies. And while they planted crops, baked bread, and raised children, they also believed in something deeper. Heka, the magic that flowed through everything. Magic wasn't a secret. It was a force, like gravity or sunlight. The Egyptians believed it powered the universe, kept the gods alive, and helped humans navigate life's twists and turns. It wasn't just for priests or sorcerers. Everyone used it, in small, sacred ways. A mother might whisper a spell over her child's cradle to keep away illness. A farmer might bury a charm in his field to ensure a good harvest. A scribe might draw protective symbols on a letter to guard its journey. Even the act of writing hieroglyphs was considered magical. Each symbol carried power, each word a whisper to the divine. Amulets were everywhere, tiny carved tokens shaped like scarabs, eyes, ankhs, or animals, worn around the neck, tucked into clothing, or placed in tombs. They offered protection, luck, and healing. The eye of Horus guarded against harm. The ankh promised life. The jed pillar brought stability. Each one was a silent spell, carried close to the heart. And then there were the magicians, wise men and women who knew the deeper secrets. They read stars, mixed potions, and recited ancient incantations. They weren't feared. They were respected, called upon in times of illness, heartbreak, or uncertainty. Even dreams held meaning. Egyptians believed dreams were messages from the gods, and they kept dream books to interpret them. A crocodile in your dream, good fortune. A donkey, maybe rethink your travel plans. Magic wasn't separate from religion. It was part of it. The gods themselves used Heka. Isis healed with it. Thoth wrote with it. Ra sailed with it. And humans, made in the image of the divine, carried a spark of it too. So, in ancient Egypt, to live was to believe, in spells, in symbols, in the quiet power of intention. Magic wasn't a fantasy. It was everyday life. Even gods, carved in stone and sung in hymns, can fade, not in power, but in memory. For thousands of years, the gods of Egypt ruled not just the heavens, but the hearts of the people. Ra lit the skies. Isis healed the broken. Osiris judged the dead. Horus guarded the throne. Their names echoed in temples. Their stories danced in the stars. and their magic flowed through every Nile breeze. But time, like the river, never stops. New rulers came, new beliefs arrived. The old temples, once filled with incense and chants, grew quiet. Statues stood in silence, their eyes still watching, but fewer voices called their names. The Greeks arrived, blending their gods with Egypt's. Isis became a goddess of the Mediterranean. Horus was linked to Apollo. The myths shifted, adapted, survived, but changed. Then came the Romans, and with them, new gods, new emperors, new laws. The temples were repurposed. The scrolls were buried. The priests faded into history. And then, a new faith swept across the land. One God, one book, one path. The old gods, with their feathers and falcons, their sunboats and underworlds, were no longer worshipped. Their stories became legend, their magic, memory, but they never truly vanished. Their temples still stand, in Luxor, Karnak, Edfu, whispering to the wind. Their symbols still appear, in jewelry, tattoos, dreams. Their stories are still told, in books, museums, bedtime tales, because gods don't fall. They rest, waiting in stone, sleeping in myth, dreaming in the hearts of those who still believe in magic, mystery, and the power of a well-told story. The gods may sleep in stone, but their stories still breathe, in art, in dreams, in wonder. Thousands of years have passed since Ra sailed the sky. Isis whispered spells, and Horus battled for the throne. The temples have crumbled, the scrolls have faded, but the mythology of ancient Egypt? It's still very much alive. You'll find it in museums, where golden masks and painted coffins tell tales without words. You'll see it in movies, books, and video games, where gods walk again, sometimes with lasers, sometimes with wisdom. You'll hear it in classrooms, where children learn about pyramids, pharaohs, and the feather of Mahat. Even in fashion, jewelry, and tattoos, the symbols endure. The eye of Horus still watches. The Ankh still promises life. The scarab still rolls its quiet magic across the skin of modern believers. And in stories, bedtime stories like this one, the gods rise again, not to rule, but to remind that truth matters, that love endures, that balance is worth fighting for. Egyptian mythology has become a mirror, reflecting our hopes, our fears, our desire to understand the unseen. So as you drift off tonight, know this: the Nile still whispers, the stars still remember, and somewhere, deep in the duat, Osiris still watches, calm, eternal, and proud of how far his story has traveled. Thank you for journeying through the sands and stars with me, from the birth of gods to the quiet legacy they left behind. It's been a magical ride. Wherever you are, whether it's a peaceful night in Lahore or a quiet corner in London, may your dreams be light as Ma at Yes Feather. Good night.